no right to face your accuser, and all of a sudden someone's showing up to take your guns away. There's a bunch of anti-gun bills. They usually outnumber the pro-gun bills by 2 to 1.
The common theme from the anti-gun side is we have to do something. Whether or not it makes sense, it's logical, or will have a negative impact on law-abiding citizens, we're not too worried about that. You're a physician.
Hippocratic Oath, the first rule is first do no harm. These types of laws, the first people they really harm are law-abiding citizens. If it's related to your rights and they're chipping away at them, if you start compromising, you are going to lose right out. You're better to just vote against the whole thing. Don't ever try to make bad bills better.
Have there been any examples of people who have been primaried that GOA was involved in?
It's happened all over the country. If you punch me in the nose, I'm going to remember it. The one big beautiful bill was a reconciliation bill. This goes back to how the sausage is made, right?
Turn the lights down, and just put this on. It's right behind you.
The only garbage I see floating out there is just supporters.
Greetings, loyal ladies and gentlemen of the Garbage Gang. Welcome to episode 4 of Mike G and the Garbage Gang podcast. Remember, if you want to be a member of the Garbage Gang, we need you to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got a very special guest in the studio with us today. He's a founding member of the Garbage Gang. We've got Pennsylvania State Director of Gun Owners of America, Dr. Val Finnell. Dr. Val, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, it's great to be here, Mike, and thanks for making me a founding member of the Garbage Gang. That intro video is just amazing with all of us in the junkyard and the garbage. It's amazing. I love it.
I'm glad that you like it. And shout out to Rodney who put that together.
Yes.
Fantastic, talented man. So Dr. Val, since we're on episode of the Garbage Gang podcast, you've been on my previous shows before. Mm-hmm. So some of our loyal members of the Garbage Gang might know who you are. Others might not if they're new to the Garbage Gang. Tell us a little bit about what you do at Gun Owners of America.
Yeah, so I am the Pennsylvania State Director for Gun Owners of America. Gun Owners of America is a national gun rights organization. We have about 2.5 million members and supporters nationwide. And I am basically in charge of Pennsylvania operations. So I get the honor of being a registered lobbyist here, going into the Capitol, talking to legislators, working on getting pro-gun bills advanced and anti-gun bills defeated. Also, we get involved in elections. So I'm the chairman of the Gun Owners of America Incorporated Committee, which is our Pennsylvania Independent Expenditure Committee, which is similar to a super PAC, but it operates on the state level. So we endorse candidates, we oppose candidates, and we spend money independently in elections. And as you know, next year we're gearing up for some big ones with our gubernatorial election, and of course, the entire state legislature is up for, the state house is up for election, and then half of the Senate. So it's going to be a really big year for us at GOA next year.
I know you said that you work on advancing legislation. I'm sure a lot of your time is spent also blocking legislation that would take away our rights.
Yes, it's advancing and opposing, right? So in the environment we're in now, like the Pennsylvania State House is controlled by the Democrats by a 1-vote margin. And so there's a bunch of anti-gun bills. They usually outnumber the pro-gun bills by 2 to 1. And if they should attempt to move those bills, then we would oppose them. And we had some success last session defeating several on the floor. So that's what we do. We primarily we want to push pro-gun legislation, but in the environment we're in now, at least in the Pennsylvania House, the Senate is still in control of the Republicans. But we would be opposing the bills in the House. The environment we are in now in Pennsylvania it's kind of a stalemate. It's really hard to get anything done on the pro-gun side, and the anti-gun folks, which is good for them. It is difficult for them to do things, but it's difficult for us to do things now. Even if we got things to the governor's desk, it's very unlikely Governor Shapiro would, sign a pro-gun bill into law. So that's why next year's elections are going to be very important for us.
On the other side, you mentioned that the Democrats have the advantage in the House.
Yes.
Are they all voting unanimously for any anti-gun
They're
measures?
all in lockstep, save maybe for one, which is Representative Frank Burns in House District 72. Unfortunately, Recently, he voted anti-gun on a floor amendment, which would have brought constitutional carry or permitless carry up for a vote. And so we actually revoked his endorsement because of that. So I would say, and he's trying to save face for himself right now by throwing in another bill to distract people. But the Democrats spent $3 million plus in that election. So he's very hard pressed to go against his caucus now. So it's really, if you roll the clock back, even just like 4 or 5 years ago, we may have had half a dozen pro-gun Democrats and one in the Senate, half a dozen in the House, maybe one in the Senate. Now we have none in the Senate and really less than one in the House, right? So it's so polarized now. When I was growing up, I grew up in the Pittsburgh area, in Allegheny County. Virtually all the Democrats there were pro-gun, and now they're all pretty much lockstep.
And where is this legislator out of?
He's in Cambria County, so House District 72 is Cambria County. It's a heavily Republican district, but he's been there for a long time. Let's just put it that way. And it's time for us to make a change. I mean, especially after him betraying us on the House floor like he did. He's thrown up a constitutional amendment to try to get constitutional carry through, and this is an effort just for him to save face, really. And it's a bad idea. So to get a constitutional amendment passed in Pennsylvania, you have to pass the bill in 2 consecutive sessions. And then, guess what? It has to go to a referendum, which is from our perspective, if we had to push that, it would cost a lot of money and a lot of effort. And there's 2 perfectly good bills in the House now, House Bill 454, Senate Bill 357. Those bills are true constitutional carry bills that we could get through. And so the best course of action for us is to, flip the House back to a pro-gun majority, get a pro-gun governor in there, and then from there we can pass the legislation that we need to pass.
Last week we had Evan Knappen on the program, and New Jersey is notoriously anti-gun, rabidly anti-gun.
You don't say.
And frankly oppressive. You talked about having to oppose legislation here in Pennsylvania, which might surprise quite a few of our listeners. What kinds of bills did you have to oppose and defeat on the House floor?
Well, the big ones are what we say universal registration checks. Other people refer to them as universal background checks. And those things are bad in the sense, like in Pennsylvania, as you know, with our PIC system, we have mandatory background checks on all handguns, transfers, but long guns, we don't.
Yeah, save some exceptions for the handgun.
Save some exceptions for the handguns, for first degree relatives like
spouses.
That. Between spouses, absolutely. But for the most part, if you transfer, you have to go through. It's pretty universal. But for long guns, that is not the case. And what a universal background check bill would do is force all long gun sales, even between private individuals, to go through an FFL. Now, I personally have an FFL, and I'm opposed to that. And we're opposed to that at GOA, and the reason is that this sets up the whole thing for registration. So if you look back in the Obama administration, I believe it was in his second term, his Department of Justice issued a memo that basically said universal background checks don't work unless there's also a registration scheme, and which makes sense. So how could if a gun is seized in a crime, how would you would know how it was transferred unless there was registration? So universal background checks feed right into registration, and that's why we're opposed to them. And we even call them universal registration checks for that reason. So there's that, and that's always on the top of the anti-gun list. The other thing is red flag gun confiscation orders, where you throw your due process rights out the window, where an angry ex, or an employer or somebody that or employee doesn't like you, and they end up, calling in a police report on you that, you're a threat to someone. And then someone goes in front of a judge, as the lawyers would say, ex parte, just one party goes before the judge. You have no right to face your accuser, and all of a sudden someone's showing up to take your guns away. And so we're vehemently opposed to, red flag laws. The other thing that really comes up a lot in Pennsylvania is lost and stolen, criminalizing a gun owner twice for losing their firearm. But recently now, and what's caught on in Pennsylvania and other places, is the so-called scary ghost guns, right, or unserialized firearms. We refer to them as homemade firearms. So we've had the right in this country to make a firearm before we were even a country, right? And so this is deeply rooted in our tradition in the United States, enshrined into the Constitution and the Second Amendment, enshrined into Article 1, Section 21 of Pennsylvania's Constitution. We can make our own firearms. And so now they want to outlaw, 3D printed guns, unserialized firearms in Pennsylvania. That's huge. So that's another thing that we're going to be fighting is that.
Evan was talking about how they did so in New Jersey, and they made it a crime of the first degree, which is the same level of offense as murder.
I heard that, yes.
And he also said that they didn't make an exception for pre-68 unserialized firearms. So for people who might be unfamiliar, before 1968 with the Gun Control Act, there was no requirement that manufacturers even serialized firearms.
Right.
So you may have, some of them did it voluntarily,
Right.
and others did not. So you could have a perfectly lawfully purchased firearm that's unserialized just because of its age, and that would effectively become illegal.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. And, as an FFL, sometimes you get, old military rifles. And like you said, those were typically serialized. But pre-1968, they didn't have a serial number. So that's crazy. So now, you've done nothing wrong with this gun, right? You just made one. You just have it in your possession. And now all of a sudden, you're a felon at the, as you said, equivalent to murder, correct?
Crime of the first degree.
Crime of the first degree.
Yeah, this, as high as it goes in New Jersey.
Oh, my.
And he's concerned that the next stage is they'll start issuing the death penalty for possessory offenses in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. But it's scary to think that we've got similar legislation being proposed and supported by quite a few of our lawmakers here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and the other thing is the Glock Switches. These things are showing up in crimes every now and then. So they want to outlaw what they refer to as machine gun conversion devices, and so they want to make it. They want to make it doubly illegal, I suppose. So it's illegal under federal law, Title 18, 922-0, and also under 27 CFR. I don't remember the section of the code, but those things are automatically illegal under federal law. And for your viewers who may not know, a Glock switch is this little piece of plastic that goes on the end of the Glock and would convert it to full auto. And there are other devices like this, like a lightning connector, which is a little piece of metal that you can drop into your AR-15. And here's the kicker. These little devices, these Glock switches or the metal connector, they're actually considered firearms under federal law.
A machine gun.
A machine gun. Yes, they're considered a machine gun.
Even if they're not assembled and put together or anything.
Just having that part, and that's it. So what is it, 10 years in jail, $250,000 fine, something like that? Yeah. Right. So they're already illegal. And arguably, under current Pennsylvania law, under Title 18-908, these are all, machine guns are considered offensive weapons, I believe. So they're
unless
trying,
you can show proof of compliance with the NFA, which you can't do unless it's a post-sample machine gun, and you're an FFL with an SOT and all this other stuff.
And all those things. So so they're trying to make something doubly illegal and
triply illegal, actually.
Triply illegal,
because there are already two laws.
There's already two laws, right? So So I believe you're a criminal defense attorney, right?
I am.
Yeah, and do criminals follow gun control laws?
Well, I'm not certain how, if you already have two laws that carry stiff penalties prohibiting this type of device, and I'm not saying whether that's a good idea or bad idea in the first place, but the fact is they're there. I'm not sure that adding a third will force the criminal to say, you know what, 3 laws is where I draw the line.
Right, exactly.
I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. I'm not some kind of monster. And another thing I brought up during that discussion was there were concerns. They said, we're getting approached by law enforcement officers who tell us that there are these drive-by shootings routinely. And every week there's a drive-by shooting and there's a Glock switch involved. And they're having difficulty prosecuting because there's no law specific to Glock switches. And my response was, I'm sorry. Are they having difficulty prosecuting for drive-by shootings?
I know, right?
Is this not aggravated assault and attempted murder?
Right.
And that seems like a logical response that gets pushed to the side in the name of we have to do something. That seems to be the common theme from the anti-gun side is we have to do something. Right. Whether or not it makes sense, it's logical, or will have a negative impact on law-abiding citizens, we're not too worried about that, but we got to do something.
We have to do something.
You're a physician.
Yes.
Hippocratic Oath kind of comes to mind, doesn't it? And what's that all about?
Well, the first Hippocratic Oath, the first rule is, primum non nocere, right? Do no harm. First, do no harm, right? And these types of laws, the first people they really harm are law-abiding citizens, just like in the case you mentioned in New Jersey where they, now, let me ask a question. If you already possess an unserialized firearm in New Jersey, is that grandfathered in or not?
He didn't mention that, and okay. I'll be honest, I've done less and less in New Jersey, except for specific cases with him. Mm-hmm. And the fact is the laws have so rapidly changed over the last few years over there, where if you're not practicing day in and day out, you're not going to know the ins and outs of this stuff. He certainly didn't mention that there was some kind of clause that grandfathers people in.
Yeah, because that would be an example of doing harm, right? You're harming people, after the fact, right? So you've lawfully assembled a firearm for yourself, which you're permitted to do under federal law, and then all of a sudden you're a felon, right? And criminals all day long don't give a damn about that, right? They're going to make a gun, steal a gun, do whatever to get a firearm to commit a crime. And if I believe it's Thomas Jefferson paraphrasing, he said, or maybe it was Cesar Beccaria, his next door neighbor, that said something like, if a criminal is already set on violating the higher law, what makes you think he would obey the lesser? Correct. And again, I'm paraphrasing there. So someone is going to commit armed robbery, someone's going to commit murder or aggravated assault, then they will have no problem violating a gun control law, and not going through a licensed dealer with a background check, right? So, this is why gun control on its surface makes no sense whatsoever. It only impacts people who are going to obey the law anyway.
It reminds me of the sensitive places laws that you have in effect, like making laws that you can't possess firearms in a school, let's say, because of these atrocities that we have seen taking place over the last decade or so, even going back to Columbine, let's say. Mm-hmm. But if you have somebody like the Columbine people, and you had this law that forbids firearm possession on school grounds, and you've got your little sign with the gun and the circle and the line through it, and does anybody really believe that somebody like that is going to look at that sign or know about that law and say, I'd love to murder all of these innocent people, but I can't bring guns into this location? That would be against the law. It seems like it doesn't make any logical sense.
Yeah, and here's the thing, Mike. Criminals look for easy targets because they don't want anybody to shoot back at them. So they look for places that have those signs. And the research by John Lott has shown that 90% of mass shootings occur in gun-free zones. So if you have one of those signs, no guns allowed here, you're basically painting a target on the back of everybody's there. And I think you would agree, along with me and everybody else watching this show, that children are one of our most precious assets, right? And yet we're not going to protect them with firearms. Yet if you walk into a bank, there's armed guards. Politicians have armed security, right? But we will not allow to have, teachers in Pennsylvania to be armed. We'll go through the proper steps to do so, because the teachers union is against that. So we don't want to protect our children the same way we protect our money and our politicians. That makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, go to Rodeo Drive or Beverly Drive out in Beverly Hills, and all of these luxury stores have armed guards standing up front, whether it's a jewelry store or a high-end handbag store.
That's where you shop regularly, correct?
I spent a lot of time in that area, as you're aware. Yeah. Beautiful place to walk, but California has had its own problems in terms of anti-gun legislation and anti-gun enforcement over the years. Mm-hmm. I want to go back to the registration, the thing that you were talking about, because you were saying that these universal background checks will not be effective without registration, as proclaimed by Obama himself.
Yes, that's right.
And some people who are watching this may be conservative leaning or pro-freedom, but not necessarily in the gun community and familiar with this stuff. So some of these folks might have questions about why registration would be a bad idea. Could you explain from your perspective why registration would be a terrible thing?
Well, if you like history, and if you look at the historical examples, when firearms have been registered, it leads to confiscation at some point. And people will say, well, that's a bogeyman. You're throwing it out there. This isn't Nazi Germany. What happened in England in the 1990s. It happened in Australia. It's happened in New Zealand. Okay. Right after the mosque shootings, I believe, they used their registration lists. And it happened here in New York. So New York City registered semi-automatic firearms in the beginning of the 1960s, I believe. And they promised, we'll never use this list for confiscation, because when they were outlawed, they did. And there's even a remark in local media in New York in 1991 said that the police were going to be doing spot checks. So this is the danger, is that registration at some point could and will lead to confiscation. And what we've seen is the federal and state governments putting the pieces together to make all of this come to fruition, particularly NICS, National Instant Check System, which, anytime you have computerized records and centralization of records, it makes registration very easy. And this is why we're so aggressive at GOA for going after the ATF. If there's even any sign of them keeping records like they shouldn't, we sue them and demand that they be destroyed, right? So this is an ongoing thing. In Pennsylvania, we have the PIC system, which is basically our instant check system. And there was a push in the legislature. We talked about this yesterday. There was a push in the legislature to make the electronic e-PICs to be mandatory. Now, I use e-PICs as an FFL. I'm a computer guy, and I don't like to mess around with paper. But I'll tell you what, it's not a user-friendly system. And if we mandated everybody go into that system, then it only takes a legislative session, one or two down the road, for them to add, let's flip the switch and make not only handguns, but let's register all long guns into PICs. And then you have an electronic database. I would rather walk into the Pennsylvania State Police office and have them see a stack of paper like this and say, have a nice day. Right. But actually, I'd rather have no paper there at all, of course. But if I had to choose between the two, stick with the paper. Right. Obviously, we want NICS to be gone. We want PICs to be gone and go back to pre-Brady era, right? But that's the dangers. All these pieces come together. So you have electronic registration, and now you pass laws for universal background checks. All the components are there for registration, and that could ultimately lead to confiscation once Congress or state legislature passes a law to seize your AR-15, seize whatever type of gun they believe is not politically correct at the time, and they have a list to go after people.
In New York, with this registration that led to confiscation, wasn't there an incident that went south in Staten Island? Did you hear about that?
I'm not familiar with that.
I remember reading some kind of reports about an incident that went very, very poorly as a result of one of these confiscation incidents in Staten Island. We'll have to look more into that.
Yeah, we definitely will. I'm definitely going to look into that for sure.
So registration leads to confiscation,
yes,
is your position.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this. What sets GOA apart from any other organization? I'm not saying necessarily we're not on the same team as far as advancing the Second Amendment and everything, but what makes GOA unique?
Well, we say we're the no compromise, and the only no compromise gun lobby in Washington. And, of course, that plays out in the states, too. And other gun rights groups like to use that moniker as well. We follow a model that's a little different. There's two different ways that you can approach the legislature or elected officials when you want to get something done or stop something. One is called access-based politics. And that's where you want the legislator to return your phone call, you want to be heard, you want to have a seat at the table, and it leads to negotiating and dealing. So we wanted to get something done, right? And then they wanted a horse trade and say, you give us something in return, which was anti-gun, right? And over the years, this is how we've lost our rights. So in order for the lobbying group to maintain their access and be on good terms with the legislators to get something done, they give and take, right? And what happens over time is, if you follow the access-based model, is you end up representing the legislature to your members rather than your members to the legislature. So we don't follow that model. So we follow a model that's called confrontational politics. So it's based on mobilizing people and confronting. So, and it comes down to one thing: give us your vote or give us your seat. That's it. So, for example, for the bill that we're working on, we would email those legislators and explain why we want to have this done, and we expect them to vote for it, and then we hold them accountable to that. Now, it's as a practical matter, it's getting more difficult to hold Democrats accountable, right? Because they're so far to the left now. We have maybe one at this point in the whole General Assembly that we have some leverage on. But for the most part, on the other side of the aisle, we have a lot of leverage. So we try to we mobilize and we confront. If they vote wrong, then we confront them about it. We tell their constituents, we mail their district, and that's how we hold their feet to the fire and help make them toe the line and realize that there's no wheeling or dealing. We're the lesser of two evils. We're better than the other guy, so you have to go with us. If we do that, we've lost up front. We've surrendered preemptively, and we don't want to do that.
Have there been any examples of people who have been primaried because they didn't get on board with pro-legislation or they got on board with anti-legislation? Maybe not necessarily even here in Pennsylvania, but throughout the country that you could think of that GOA was involved in?
Yeah, absolutely. It's happened all over the country, but here in Pennsylvania, the most recent example I can think of is Representative Keith Gillespie and Stan Saylor. So back in 2018, they voted for House Bill 2060, which was kind of a red flag light bill for PFA orders and gun confiscation. So GOA opposed that bill. So, and this goes back again to the no compromise, and we hold them accountable. If you punch me in the nose, I'm going to sound like, if you punch me in the nose, I'm going to remember it, right? I'm going to remember. So we remembered that they voted wrong in 2018. So we actually got involved in their primaries a few years ago, and they lost. And we actually used House Bill 2060. We call it's kind of like nailing a wolf hide to the barn, right? And that's how we approach things. So right here in Pennsylvania, we've used that bad votes and to defeat people who voted for that bill. So that's like the clearest example. So if you punch us in the nose, we're going to remember. So legislative season ties in with election season, and we connect the two things. If you keep just pushing for things over here and it doesn't play out on election season, then you're not going to get anywhere. The legislators and politicians will say, "Hey, did you get hit? Oh no, I didn't get hit. I guess everything's fine." So if they vote wrong, they get hit. They get hit politically. We mail their districts. We generate phone calls. We say things on social media, and that's how we hold their feet to the fire. So it's no compromise, and then that's coupled with confrontational politics. If you go access like some other organizations use, then you end up with things like FOPA, like the Firearms Owner Protection Act in 1986, right? So McClure-Volkmer. So you could transport your guns across state lines. Isn't that great? But now you can't buy a machine gun unless it's made before 1986. Gee, thanks.
Yeah, and this is signed in by Ronald Reagan.
Right.
And supported by some of the pro-gun organizations.
That's right. And that's what access buys you. Over time, you get a slow whittling away of your rights.
And really, it's been death by 1,000 paper cuts in terms of gun control.
Right.
Because they're never satisfied. It's never like, okay, now that we've got this law on the books, we're okay with never having any additional gun control laws. We're satisfied. It's not going to happen anymore. Mm-hmm. There's always something new to come up with, even if it's not necessary. The third law.
Right. And what you're looking at is the left always operates on a confrontational basis. They ask for more than what they're going to get. They shoot for the moon, hoping to get to the mountain, right? And then conservatives, they look at every battle as an isolated fight. And then they figure, that's over. They retreat. And then the left picks up again right where they left off. And so they might get half of what they want, a quarter of what they want, but we've lost 25%. And then they say, no, but you're the one being unreasonable. Well, how are we being unreasonable? We're the only people who are going to be losing something here. You're gaining 25%. We're losing 25% of our rights. He said, how are we being unreasonable? Right. So that goes to the conservative mindset. We were raised, most of us, in a Judeo-Christian background. It's be nice to people, try to be agreeable, try to find common ground. For the most part of life, that works, right? But when you're talking about constitutional rights and what things work in the legislature, it doesn't work that way. So we have to retrain our people to say, no, we have to do the same thing. We need to start slicing the pie in our direction, and we need to ask for more than what we're going to get. So we shoot to the moon, hoping to get to the mountain, and then we get to 25%, to 50%, and we gradually get our rights back. That's how we have to. But we're not going to get our rights back by surrendering 25% of the time. Eventually, there's no pie left.
And what do you say to people who think that you have to sometimes give a little to get a little? That just never works out that way. That's not the way it actually works.
That's not how it works. And really, I would say when you're dealing with your constitutional rights, now if there are things, of course, that you can negotiate that are not related to your constitutional rights, like procedural things, certain things in certain bills. You could talk about how to do things, and you could talk about the best way of doing things and change things around that way. But if it's straight up, we'll run this bill if you agree to, support our red flag bill. That's what that's the kind of offer that they'll give you. Or they'll say, if they're pushing a gun ban, like a semi-automatic ban, and they'll say everybody's guns are going to be seized, and then they roll back and say, look, we'll grandfather in all the guns you currently own. Would that be okay? Right? Or if you were in the military, it'll be fine. Mm-hmm. Right? And they'll chip at it that way. No, you don't agree to that. And you could snatch, victory from the jaws of defeat, right? Or defeat from the jaws of victory. You're ready. That's what I meant to say. You're ready to win, on the vote, and basically, they're trying to chip away, and you're going to agree and surrender your rights.
So there's a difference between incremental small gains,
yes,
and gains that come along with losses.
That's right. So I think Morton Blackwell of the Leadership Institute said that it's one of the rules of the public policy process is all increments are gains, but all gains are increments, but not all increments are gains. All gains are increments, but not all increments are gains. And I think that's what you have to remember when you're dealing with us. So yeah, you can agree on like other stuff that's in a bill that's really not, procedural stuff, who's going to do what, whatever. But if it's related to your rights and they're chipping away at them, if you start compromising, you are going to lose right out. You're better to just vote against the whole thing. Don't ever try to make bad bills better. And that's what a lot of gun groups have tried to do, is make bad bills better. And guess what? You get a bad bill and the legislature will say, we'll fix it next time. We'll fix it next session.
Yeah.
They won't.
So one thing Evan was saying is that we have to celebrate little gains sometimes. For example, he said if we were to get everything off of the NFA except for machine guns, a lot of people would say, well, that's no good because we didn't get machine guns off, and they complain and not take it for an incremental win,
right,
as we were talking about. There's a difference between something like that, where you're getting rid of a bulk of the NFA, but it's not the entire thing, could be better,
right, versus,
hey, if we take off short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns, will you agree to universal background checks? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Right, exactly. We wouldn't make that kind of a deal, obviously, right, because you're losing, right? You're gaining on one side, but you're losing. That's not a good deal at all. But that's a perfect segue into what just happened in Congress, right? So there was an incremental gain. It wasn't the way we wanted it, but it came out that way.
Let's talk about that in a minute, because I want to go back to one thing before we get there. You were talking about how registration leads to confiscation. Suppose you have somebody on the other side, or somebody who's unfamiliar, as we previously mentioned, and their question was, well, what about the National Firearms Act of 1934? I say that hasn't led to confiscation of all of your NFA items. What would you say in response to that? Been around for 90 years, right?
Well, I would say that it's certainly there and it could happen, right?
Would you say that in certain circumstances it really has happened based on the classification or reclassification of certain items by the ATF?
Yeah, I would say
where
so.
They have the authority to decide, oh, now this turns into an SBR or things like that. And they wouldn't necessarily have registration on something that wasn't previously classified as an NFA item. But when they force people to register certain things, then they're aware of them. And if they decide that you can no longer legally have them, there have been situations where the reclassification ended up in essentially confiscation.
Yeah, I think so. And also the reclassification itself, like, you know, with pistol, like the whole pistol brace thing, if you had a firearm with a pistol brace on it and they reclassify it as an SBR, you know, then you either have to register that, right? And then it's subject to, or destroy it or decommission it somehow to take the pistol brace off. So just by the reclassification itself, it threatens the existence of you continuing to own your firearm the way you had it.
And if we go a few years down the line, let's say, suppose that all of the people who voluntarily registered their AR pistols with braces as SBRs during that period, where there was I don't want to call it amnesty, but go ahead, it's free.
Right.
So, hey, I've got a puppy in my van. Do you want to come see it? But for all those folks who did that, now it's no longer an SBR.
Right. They've registered their guns.
Obviously, for people who ended up with the tax stamp, you know, they've got an SBR now. But if you have people who submitted the paperwork and it never got finalized, because there are a bunch of people who ended up in that position. Are you aware of that?
Right. Yes.
Because they sent it in sort of an in-between stage, and then it was no longer necessary, and it was never finalized. So those folks are probably in a curious situation if somewhere down the line we see positions starting to change, right?
Right. Exactly. Absolutely.
And some people will say, well, the courts have ruled on this and there's been a definitive outcome. Would it be the first time that legislators or potentially unelected bureaucrats impose some kind of law, regulation, restriction that was in contravention what we thought was well-settled case law and constitutional rights?
That is unheard of. Bite thy tongue, right? No, it's never happened.
So let's get back to the one big beautiful bill, because the NFA was directly involved with this for a while. It looked like we were going to get certain items outside the scope of the National Firearms Act, which had been heavily regulated since 1934. And brief history for our listeners who are unfamiliar with the National Firearms Act of 1934. It's a knee-jerk reaction to the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And basically Congress gets together and they put together this list of all these super scary items, right? Your silencer suppressors, short-barreled shotguns, short-barreled rifles, fully automatic weapons, destructive devices, the any other weapon category. And they say if you want to own one of these items, if you want the privilege as peasants to own one of these items, you have to register them with the federal government and you've got to pay a tax.
Yes.
And what people might not understand is that the tax being $200 on many of these items was cost prohibitive back in those days.
Yes.
I wasn't alive in 1934. My dad always tells me the hot dogs cost a nickel in Coney Island when he was growing up. And the average family car in 1934 cost about $550 to put it into perspective. So $200 just to be able to buy one of these things was out of the question for these people. And really is the first major piece of federal gun control legislation that we saw in our country's existence. So we've had this around for quite some time, where you register the item with the ATF, you pay your tax, you get proof that you've paid that tax, imposed as a taxing scheme.
Yes, as a taxing scheme. That's right.
So under the one big beautiful bill, it looked like a lot of these items were going to be outside the purview of the NFA, and they were going to be treated similarly to other firearms and not have to go through this process.
Right.
And what did we end up with when it was all said and done?
Well, this goes back to how the sausage is made, right? So if you recall, in the House. So all these, the one big beautiful bill is a reconciliation bill. So it deals with the budget, which constitutionally, I believe, has to begin in the House. It was H.R. 1. So this was the budget bill, the reconciliation bill. And in the House, at the same time, there were two independent bills, the Hearing Protection Act and the Short Act. And one was, to get suppressors deregulated and off the NFA, and the Short Act was for short barrel firearms. So when the House bill and the reconciliation bill, we got the HPA put into the reconciliation bill. Understanding being, because it's a tax, it may survive scrutiny because it's a reconciliation bill. And originally in the House, it was just an elimination of the tax. But GOA's efforts had the full repeal. We had the full repeal put in the House bill. So enter the Senate. Reconciliation bill goes over the Senate. Because of our efforts, not only were suppressors put in the bill, but we had short barrel firearms put into the Senate bill. And it wasn't just eliminating the tax, it was eliminating the registration requirements and tax, the whole enchilada. Now there was a hurdle, and that hurdle involves something called the Byrd Rule. I don't know if your viewers may or may not know about this, but the Byrd Rule is there so non-budget items don't get sneaked into the reconciliation bill to avoid a filibuster. So, the Senate is a weird institution. So you need to have 60 votes really in the Senate to pass something if you have a standalone bill. And the reason is somebody, the opposite sides, people who oppose it can filibuster it, basically time out the clock on the bill. And so in order to beat that filibuster, you have to have 60 votes, which is called cloture, right? So that was in the bill. And so what the Senate parliamentarian does is that person her name's Elizabeth McDonough, appointed by Harry Reid in 2012, a Democrat, looks at all the stuff that's in the reconciliation bill and then decides what belongs and what doesn't, right? What fits with the budget, what fits in, and so Elizabeth McDonough ruled that the HPA and the Short Act violated the Byrd Rule. She said it was outside the scope of the budget. So the only way for us to overcome that, either to waive it or to overcome it, was to have 60 votes. That was impossible. The other thing that could have been done is John Thune could have fired the parliamentarian, or Vance could have overridden her. And we pushed hard for that. Did not happen. So because that didn't happen, she took it out of the bill. So they put back in the $0, right? So the $0 amount passed the Byrd Rule scrutiny, right? So that's how we got to where we were in the Senate. So we wanted to get her fired. We wanted Vance to overrule her. And so it didn't happen.
The federal government recently began processing applications under the 925C Relief from Disabilities program. If you're federally prohibited from owning and possessing firearms, you shouldn't wait. You have to act now while this program's available. Visit us at thegunlawfirm.com and schedule a free case strategy session to determine whether you're a good candidate. Back to the episode. Was there any precedent for the person being fired? It's interesting how this person stays throughout changes in administration, changes in political makeup.
Yeah, it happened in the Nixon administration. There was somebody who was fired previously, but it doesn't happen too often. And I think Thune kind of ruled it wasn't going to happen. He just wasn't going to do it.
Why?
They didn't want to set a precedent for doing this. They didn't want to go nuclear. They don't want to. They always think this way, that somehow the Democrats are going to treat them fairly when they're in the minority.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Sure. So they're going to end. That's the thing. If Schumer's in charge again, he's going to end the filibuster, and then the Senate becomes like the House. And I realize that cuts both ways. But for us, we want to stop gun control. Easiest way to do that is have 60 votes. You need the other side needs 60 votes, and it's really hard to get. But like I said, it cuts both ways. It makes it hard for us to pass pro-gun legislation. So anyway, that was eliminated. I mean, the registration part, but the zero tax state, it passed the Byrd Rule. It went back to the House. We weren't done yet. We said so. Andrew Clyde, Representative Clyde from Georgia, 9th District. He decided we wanted him to put the full repeal back into the bill and send it back over to the Senate. Didn't happen in committee, and so it ended up passing, and we got the $0 tax. So that's where we are now with it. So there's a lot of criticism that's floating around out there about what GOA may or may not have done. And let me be clear, we were 100% right from the start repealing, getting suppressors and short barrel firearms out of the NFA, 100%. And we didn't stop fighting for that until the end. The problem is if you don't have 60 votes, we would have lost everything in the Senate. We wouldn't even have got the $0 tax. So now that we have the $0 tax, this sets us up for a lawsuit. And as you know, the case was 1937, was Zorinsky or something like that. It was the name of the Supreme Court case. So in 1937, the NFA, which passed in 1934, was challenged, right? And it was challenged on the fact it was unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court ruled, no, it's constitutional because it, at its core, is a tax. I believe I'm summarizing that right. I know, and I'm not an attorney, but I play one on TV sometimes. So I'm not, but it's like, so they decided it was a tax, and because it was a tax, it was constitutional. But now, wait a minute, there's $0. So now the basis of GOA's lawsuits in conjunction with our industry partners, we were the first to file it. We filed this lawsuit on July 4th on Independence Day. Our argument is this: if you have a $0 tax, there's no tax consequences in this bill. Therefore, the National Firearms Act, at least as it applies to suppressors and short barrel rifles, is unconstitutional. It has its registration with no tax. It has no taxing authority. Would you agree with that assessment?
I actually brought this up when there was that tax forbearance for the AR pistols being registered as SBRs. Because how do you have a tax law that doesn't impose a tax?
Right.
And this does it in a more permanent way. So I think the argument is even stronger because Congress, when they enacted the National Firearms Act, it was based upon the authority to tax. And people often forget that Congress has limited, specifically enumerated powers.
Yes.
We live in a world where people seem to think throughout our entire country that Congress can do anything that it believes is a good idea and the people get behind, which is simply not true. Constitutionally, Congress can only act in certain regards, one of them being the power to tax. Mm-hmm. You've got interstate commerce, which they've completely blown out of proportion.
Yes.
And that wasn't the case in the 1930s the way it is today. Because today they'll use 7 degrees to Kevin Bacon to get to how does this affect interstate commerce?
Right.
And it's easier for them to make those arguments with how mobile the world is and the internet and how much commerce does happen among the states, what isn't involved with or affecting interstate commerce. So they really use that to try to regulate everything. But Congress does not have a general police power the way states do. States can enact laws essentially that they think are a good idea as long as they don't violate any other portion of the Constitution, state or federal level. Congress doesn't have that authority, specifically enumerated powers. And if taxing is the power that was used in order to found this law, if you get rid of the tax part, that really gets rid of the foundation upon which this law was allegedly constitutionally passed.
That's exactly right, and that's the crux of our argument. Now, I know the NRA and Second Amendment Foundation also have a lawsuit, but it has not been filed yet, so we don't know what's in it. But our lawsuit was filed immediately, and that's the argument that we're taking. Just what you said perfectly, much better than me, of course. And it's there's no foundation for the tax anymore. It's zero, and so now you have an unconstitutional registration scheme. And that's our argument. Now, whether that will extend to machine guns, because of the HPA and Short Act didn't involve that, I don't know. But I think this is a great opportunity. Of course, we filed that lawsuit in the Northern District of Texas. That's where the lawsuit was filed. So we're going to take it from there.
Have you had other cases in the Northern District of Texas?
We have, yeah. Off the top of my head, there's been so many of them I can't remember off the top of my head. But yes, we have had we've had cases. I know one of our attorneys called me this morning about possibly filing a case in Pennsylvania, which would be in the Western District. So, and that would of course go to the Third Circuit. But so the fifth. I think that's Texas is fifth, correct? Fifth district.
I believe so.
Yeah. So we've had a number of cases in the fifth district.
Fifth Circuit.
Fifth Circuit.
Yeah.
That's what I meant to say. Yes.
Yeah, federal circuits are tricky for people who are unfamiliar with the way it's set up. You've got your lower courts, your trial courts, and there might be multiple in each state. Some states only have one. And then you'll have multiple states in a federal appellate district. So Third Circuit, we've got Pennsylvania, we've got New Jersey, we've got Delaware. And who else? Do you know this?
Pennsylvania, Delaware, and
Pennsylvania, Delaware, Jersey, and there's one more.
It's in New York? Maryland?
You're never going to get it. It's the Virgin Islands.
A Virgin.
Makes total sense, right?
Yes.
Interestingly, there's a case out of the Virgin Islands that went to the Third Circuit, a gun law case that I cite very frequently, having to do with when somebody's considered an unlawful user.
So maybe we should get more plaintiffs in the Virgin Islands and go down there and represent them, in district court, and then go to the circuit. This could be
it sounds like
good
fun.
strategy.
Yeah. We're advancing by vacationing, right?
That's right.
But you have these federal circuits, and then, of course, they can appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States, and they decide whether they want to take these cases. That's the tricky part about it. Sometimes when you'll have circuit splits, so you have appellate decisions at the federal level, and one circuit rules one way on an issue, and another circuit rules a different way. And when those start to pile up, that's when the Supreme Court typically starts to get interested. And people have been frustrated over the years about how few Second Amendment cases the Supreme Court actually takes on. It's crazy that with Brune, Rahimi, Heller, McDonald, over the last, at this point, it's over a decade, it feels like the Supreme Court takes a lot of Second Amendment cases. But when you compare it to every other right in the Bill of Rights and how often they're analyzing those, it's not even close. It's absolutely minuscule. And the fact is, in 100 years, it's how many cases you count them on your hand.
I would call it a constitutional orphan when it comes to the Supreme Court. Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Supreme Courts, I think we have one here in Pennsylvania.
Sure do.
Yeah, Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, SCOPA, as we would say. So GOA also has a case now that is pending before the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. And this goes back to some of the things we talked about earlier about unserialized firearms and the preemption battle. And if I want to stress to your viewers, we have constitutional carry as one of our big bills we like to push. There's 29 states with the constitutional permitless carry. Of course, we want Pennsylvania to be number 30, but in Pennsylvania, there's another issue that's just humongous, and that's firearms preemption. So in our state law, Title 18, 6120, it basically says that municipalities, local governments can't regulate firearms, and I believe the phrase is in any manner.
No local government regulate the ownership, possession, transportation, or transfer of firearms.
In any manner, right? And so, but does Philadelphia really respect that?
They never have. We've been litigating this stuff for how many years?
Right.
2 weeks into my law practice, we were suing the city of Harrisburg over their illegal ordinances, and there was a Philadelphia companion suit that was filed by a colleague of mine. And
it's nonstop.
No matter how many times they get struck down, they keep trying and trying. One of the interesting things about Section 6120 and preemption in Pennsylvania is that the law has evolved over the years. It's been amended a few times. And the reason it's had to be amended is when they first enacted the preemption law, local governments came back and said, well, you didn't say we couldn't regulate this aspect of firearms. And so the legislature came back. It's like, no, we got to change this. We said, regulate firearms. And then they said, well, you didn't say we couldn't regulate this aspect.
That's right.
No, you guys aren't understanding. Stop regulating firearms.
I know. And that brings up the whole field preemption debate, right? Is the question, is there field preemption in Pennsylvania, right? And as opposed to express preemption, which is what you were alluding to, is like, unless it's explicitly mentioned in 6120, then it can be regulated. Whereas the legal concept of field preemption is that the municipalities, counties can't regulate in any manner. It's the sole prerogative of the legislature, correct? So that, and going back to what you were saying about the bill being amended, so back in 2022, then Representative Matt Dowling's bill, House Bill 979, GOA pushed that, and we got that to Governor Wolf's desk, and that would have done a couple of things. One, to your point, it added manufacturing into the list of expressly preempted things, and because we knew, Philadelphia wanted to, our Supreme Court case is about Philadelphia regulating the manufacturing of unserialized firearms, so we added manufacturing to it. And then the other thing was this, to stop the financial war of attrition of these municipalities against gun owners, was that if the city, municipality, county, whatever political subdivision loses a preemption case in courts, then they have to pay your attorney's fees and any damages. This would stop this garbage, and we're the garbage gang, right? So we love garbage. So this would stop the garbage overnight, because now these cities would have to say, hey, man, we're probably going to lose this case, and then we're going to have to cough up a bunch of money to pay the attorney's fees. So, of course, Governor Wolf vetoed that. We did not have enough votes to override the veto. So that's why I think preemption is hugely important in Pennsylvania. It's right up there with constitutional carry. And then our case, we sued Philadelphia over their homemade firearms ban. It was an unserialized firearms thing that unless you had an FFL, a Type 7 FFL like I do, you can't manufacture, a gun at home, right? So we sued them. Unfortunately, we lost in district court, the Court of Common Pleas. And then the Commonwealth Court ruled against us because it says, I believe they said that these the firearms were, it wasn't, manufacturing wasn't a firearm per se, right? The regulation, the ordinance that Philadelphia passed didn't apply to firearms itself. It was only the manufacturer. There weren't firearms per se. So now we appealed at the Supreme Court, and we got aliquotter. So this is good. So now we get the opportunity to argue this case before the Supreme Court. The risk is to gun owners is the Supreme Court could wax field preemption. And that's the danger. Now, we think we have a very strong case, a very good argument, but they could wax field preemption. Now we're stuck with, if it's not explicitly listed in the law, then every municipality is going to line up and start regulating, passing ordinances saying you can't make your own firearms.
A bunch of feel-good laws. They're going to say, look what we've done, just for the sake of doing it, right?
Exactly, right.
And could you imagine if you did this where you have local governments making their own laws with any other aspect? Let's talk about, for example, traffic laws. You got over 2,000 local governments in Pennsylvania. Could you imagine if one county is like, okay, in our county, you stop on red and you go on green. The other one's like, well, over here, we actually go on red and stop on green.
We use blue lights in our county.
We use blue lights. And now you're getting a ticket because you stopped at the red light. What are you doing jamming up the intersection over here? So you're going to have a lot of accidental criminals. Governments start making their own firearms prohibitions.
That's exactly right. So we often refer to the patchwork quilt of gun laws this could create. And, you travel from one county to the next, one municipality to the next, and unbeknownst to you, you're now violating a local ordinance and can be charged with a crime. So this is why we have to have uniformity across the state, and political subdivisions are creations of the state. They're not independent. They exist at the pleasure of the state, not of themselves. So we need to have uniform. So I'm hopeful that they uphold field preemption. And the Crawford case that we just had was 9-0 against Philadelphia. They really upheld preemption there. Well, let's see what they do with this manufacturing issue. But that said, going back to the elections, going back to what we need to do next year, is that we need to get that pro-gun majority back. We need a pro-gun governor in the office. And the reason is because I'm going to try to get fast-track a strengthened preemption bill to the governor's desk that will end this garbage overnight, where the municipalities lose, they have to pay. And then and I think they need to clarify in the law and then have a debate on the floor where they say, we intend this to be field preemption. So it's in the legislative record. And then we can even put it in the law that the intent is, field preemption, to make it really strong. The entire field belongs to the state legislature, and it'll be done overnight. And that's what we need to do.
It'd be interesting if they started writing legislation in plain terms like that, but just adding,
Right.
this is field preemption.
Right.
Seriously, guys, we're not kidding. 100% field preemption.
Just please write it in there.
This is
Make
not
it
a
clear.
drill.
It's like, right. Say something like that, in legalese so it sounds good, right?
Well, don't even put it in legalese. Put it in plain English so nobody can make any mistakes about it. Throw emojis in there. 100.
I know.
You were mentioning how Governor Wolf refused to sign your bill into law.
Vetoed.
Or vetoed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Vetoed it.
Yeah.
And I'm old enough to remember, been around long enough to remember Act 192, which was during Corbett's administration. He signed it into law at tail end. And what that included was putting teeth into the preemption law, affording standing to membership organizations, because standing was an issue. It hadn't been litigated the way it has today.
Yes.
And it also providing for attorneys' fees if successful. Unfortunately, the way that law was passed ultimately ended up led to it being struck down by the courts because it was tacked on to a theft of secondary metals bill after the fact.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, that was a bill to strengthen preemption. So it violated.
passed.
Yes,
The
it violated
governor
this.
signed
Yeah,
the law.
exactly. It violated the single subject rule.
Single subject rule.
Right, and that so
It wasn't germane.
It wasn't germane, right? Which is kind of the same thing that happened in Congress with the Byrd rule. It's the germaneness argument, but it was unconstitutional in Pennsylvania because it violated that single subject rule.
That ended up ending the lawsuit that we had against the city of Harrisburg. And the way I describe it to people is we were in the ring beating our opponent, and it's not like our opponent got lucky and hit us with a shot that knocked us down. We got dragged out of the ring because it ended
Right.
up with the court saying you don't no longer have standing because Act 192 was found to be unconstitutional. But we had gotten the preliminary injunction and the ordinances were suspended for the time being.
Yeah, I think that was under Speaker Turzai that happened. Yeah, pretty sure.
Yeah. And a long time ago, though.
Yeah.
Over about 10 years ago.
Yeah, about
this
10 years
far.
ago. Right.
Yeah. And we're still dealing with the same stuff, right?
Right. So we need to get that. That's like right up at the top of our list is strengthen preemption. We got to shut down Pittsburgh and more so Philadelphia and other municipalities have now tried to pass, homemade firearms ban. We helped stop one in Erie recently. And it's just all over the place, and it'll open the floodgates. If the Supreme Court explicitly ends field preemption, it'll open up the floodgates. Then the only solution for us, is just checks and balances, civics 101, right? The only recourse for us at that point would be legislative. We'd have to go to the legislature, strengthen the law to check everybody again. And we saw the writing on the wall with this years ago. And, GOA and other pro-gun organizations have been pushing for years to strengthen the preemption law to end this.
What is the makeup of your efforts here in Pennsylvania? Are there certain places where you don't even bother to get involved because they're just so far gone to the left? Like what I've noticed is for people donating money on the left, whether it's Bloomberg or the guy with the last name that begins with an S, who will get censored if we say, but all of these leftist donors, when they get involved, it seems like they've moved on from places like New Jersey because they know they've got it on lock. And they branched out into Philadelphia. They've got Philadelphia on lock, so they're not spending nearly as much money over there. It's starting to creep further into the 5-county area. So we saw Delaware County go blue for the first time in over 100 years.
Right.
A couple of years back. Chester County is now blue. Montgomery County is now blue because that's where the money is being spent. Eventually, it seems they'll have those places on lock and continue to branch further and further. Does that come into play when GOA is considering where do we spend money?
Oh, absolutely. So, resources are limited for everybody. So we have to be smart about what races we get involved in. If you're in a Philadelphia district where it's 9-1, you may not be spending your money wisely there, right? But there are swing districts. And if you recall, a couple years ago, we had redistricting. And redistricting really changed the landscape So now it's very tight in the House and it's tighter in the Senate. So, and it's really coming down to one seat, whereas before it was a lot easier for certain Republicans to get reelected in certain districts. Now, because of redistricting and the compromises that they made with the governor, because of that, it's much more difficult. So we have to strategically look for districts that are flippable, that are within so many points. And the other thing that comes into play is, it's not just looking at numbers. The numbers are important, but it's also the candidate. The candidate is important. I mean, you could have a candidate that's in a 51-49 district, say, for sake of argument, 51 Democrats, 49% Republicans. Yeah, we can flip it, right? There's enough independents, we can flip it. But if you have a candidate who's lazy, doesn't want to do anywhere, just wants to put out yard signs and then yap on YouTube or something like that, this is what wins elections, knocking on doors. That candidate has to get off their tuchus and has to get into the street and has to go through their district and knock on doors themselves. Follow up, you could use their team, whatever, but they need to knock on doors. If they do that, it's voter contact, which wins. So one of the first questions that I ask somebody when I interview a candidate is, how's your campaign going? And I get a conversation started and I said, about door knocking. Have you been out knocking on doors? And I can usually tell after about 5 or 10 minutes of talking to them, how serious of a candidate they are. And the other issue is money. If they can't raise funds or money, it's going to be very difficult for them to win. But you can overcome the money if you walk, if you do the shoe and you knock, right? And that's the thing. Rick Saccone was, when he was first elected, he and his wife Young knocked on every door in his House district.
Really?
And they won in the Democratic district because they knocked on every door. Every door. Can you imagine that?
Do you like it when people knock on your door and want to talk to you?
Not people who are selling things.
By politicians, you wouldn't mind?
I would not mind. And the reason is I want to know who's running for office, right? I would actually like to see that. I had some paid door knockers show up, but if the politician himself, the elected official, or whoever's running comes to my door and I'm speaking to that person directly, I actually appreciate that. I really do, because that, whether I agree with that candidate or not, that tells me that candidate is interested in me and he wants to hear what I have to say. And what that candidate should be doing is asking me what issues are important to me. Oh, Val, he's a gun guy. The pen comes out and he writes, Val is concerned, or it's a checkbox about guns. Then his staff puts me on a list of this guy's concerned about guns. We send him pro-gun messages. Or flip it around if they're anti-gun, right? Or this is a pro-life person. Check off the box. And then those people that you communicate to them about what's important to them. And the only way you find that out is if you knock on doors and you talk to people, and then you have a system to track them and talk to them later. That's how you win elections. I've been to Leadership Institute's campaign management course. I was at Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership. I went through their advanced campaign management course. This is what they teach, right? And I don't see this coming from a lot of candidates. The quality of the candidates sometimes are pretty low, right? Unless they have huge name recognition or something like that. They don't know how to do this. They don't go out. They may knock on some doors. They do it half-heartedly to get somebody to put some literature. You got to knock on the doors. You got to talk to the people yourself. And if they're not home, you leave a little door hanger there. Sign, hey, this is Val. I'm running for state representative. I'm sorry I missed you. Here's my number, and here's the door hanger. I was there. I signed it. I put my name on it, right? If they're not home. And that's the thing you have to overcome what I mean to say is you cannot overcome. I can spend all the money in the world, but I cannot overcome a bad candidate.
I'm curious to hear how the majority of people think as far as people knocking on their doors. Let us know in the comments what you think about this. Maybe I'm a unique, grumpy, cranky old man.
I'm not normal.
I guess we'll see, because the way you're talking, you have me thinking that I'm not normal, that I'm some kind of weirdo.
No, I'm
that
just.
if somebody knocks on my door, I'm like, go away. I don't want to talk to anybody. Leave me alone.
And some people are like that, and you just move on, right? But but it's been shown over and over.
But it's not most people, I guess.
I think if you look at the research, if the Leadership Institute, all the people will tell you, the voter contact, it's proven. There's a lot of papers written on it. Voter contact is how you win elections. It's not yard signs. It's not putting ads on Facebook. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things. Obviously, you should do those things. We do those things. Robocalling. Oh, that's another thing. Robocalling.
It's so annoying.
I know, isn't it? But we robocall like a day before to the election, try to get people out. Text messages now are very popular. We do text.
Also so annoying.
Yeah, text messaging.
I donated like $10 to the Ted Cruz campaign. It was the worst decision I ever made. Now I get 40 texts a day.
I love some of the comments.
You're not on the list, Mike. President Trump needs you. Hey, this is Speaker Mike Johnson.
Yeah, right.
Here's what's going on. Jim Jordan here.
I know Ted Cruz calling. I know. I get the same things, and
how does it stop?
And I
Can
get to see
anybody tell us how to make this stop?
You got to hit stop, right?
Well, you hit stop, but it's like playing whack-a-mole. I hit stop on what? I actually had one, and we might file a lawsuit about this because it does violate a federal law. But hit stop. And they messaged me again. I said, stop again. Got messaged a third time. And technically, they'd have to pay damages based on that. And it's just so irritating, even though I support their cause.
Right. Yeah, I know. It is irritating. And I get to see some of the comments people write back. Some of them are hysterical.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I love to read them, even if they're just rude and vulgar, because it makes me laugh once in a while.
So if somebody replies to those
they can reply to your
texts,
text message, and if you do it right, you're seeing what they reply. And some people have these hysterical comments. We can't say them here because it's a family audience, but it is kind of funny. But
this is when your messages end up to an anti-gun person's phone.
Right. They'll send something back. But it would be more for a candidate. Oh. So if they're against the candidate, they'll say, I'd rather do this than vote for this candidate. Those kind of messages. Yeah. And they're funny, and it's like it keeps you going, because otherwise, people, you see stop. But, text messaging is good in the sense that most people open their text messages and see them, right? But, and so our goal is we want to try to bring maybe lower propensity voters, somebody who's maybe voted 2 out of the 4 last or 1 out of 4, and try to make a lower propensity voter vote in this election. That's what we're trying to do with those messages. But again, I could spend all the money in the world, and I can't really I can't overcome a lazy candidate, right? Or a candidate that hasn't done their homework. So I always suggest to the candidates when they talk to me on the phone, I say, have you gone to a course about how to run a campaign? Who is running your campaign? Is it what we call the kitchen table, right? It's like you're somebody's wife or whatever. And I'm not saying you can't win with that, but normally speaking, if you're a serious candidate, you have a campaign manager, you have somebody who at least has some track record, runs your campaign, and then you as the candidate make appearances. The campaign manager runs the campaign. But if it's just some kind of cobbled together thing and it's not done well, I always tell them, look, you need to at least get some training. Go take Leadership Institute's online course on campaign management. Go to the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership. Take their basic campaign management course. And they'll teach you a lot of things that you don't know, and that'll help you run your campaign.
Do you think a lot of people are discouraged from even attempting to run for office based on all the baggage that comes with it? How they try to really throw you under the bus and
of course,
go after your family and everything like that.
Yeah, I remarked to our Executive Vice President of GOA, John Valecco, I said, John, I said, politics is like professional wrestling. I says, it's all fake. And John looked back at me, he says, yep, and you can still get hurt.
That's great.
You're right, and it is. It's really true. And so all the people start slinging mud, digging up dirt on you. The opposition research, and a lot of people don't want to subject themselves or maybe their families to things like that. So it does discourage people. So you have to have a thick hide. You have to be able to take criticism. That I think it does keep a lot of people out of politics because they don't want to deal with that.
Do you also deal with the position where you'll have a Republican who's running and is not necessarily pro-gun or as pro-gun as GOA would want, and therefore you decide to not spend any resources on that particular election?
100%. So, well, we're in Southeast Pennsylvania right now. This is like rhino country. So, I mean, like, if you want to hunt rhinos, this is where you hunt rhinos. But, we have a lot of people, I can name some names, there's Craig Williams, there's Martina White. We can just go down the list of Republicans here who are not solidly pro-gun or maybe more left-leaning Republicans. And, so we tend to stay out of those races. And so we just leave them alone. But it doesn't mean we don't hold them accountable. So when they vote wrong, we definitely tell them about it. We want them to vote right, but we won't get involved in those races. We're not going to protect you. We're not going to spend money in a race where you vote against us. Remember, I told you, you punched us in the nose. We're going to remember that. We're going to remember you punched us in the nose. But we stay out of the race. That's how we deal with that. And then we target our resources on where we can make a difference. And the biggest way to make a difference is in primaries. So, and like we got a lot of rural counties in Pennsylvania, a lot of rural districts. And, there are some weaker Republicans there or occasional rhinos who voted against us. That's where, like Saylor and Gillespie, York County, right in that area, we made a difference there. So, we can flip a seat. We supported, was an open seat in Adams, Franklin County, Chad Reichert. We got him through the primary over another candidate wasn't as good as he was. It was a terrible candidate that some people wanted. So we got Chad Reichert in, and so this is how you make a difference, is in the primaries. And then by the time the general election rolls around, we want to have it already shaped to who the Republican would be. Or if it's a heavily Democratic district, I mean, this is rare, but if it's a Democratic district, then we would say who the better Democrat would be, because the other person isn't going to win. But again, that rarely happens now. It's not like it used to be where, like in Allegheny County, you had a lot of pro-gun Democrats. Harry Reid Shaw was one of them. He was one of the strongest supporters of the Second Amendment rights. He was in the south side of Pittsburgh. He's a longtime pro-gun Democrat. He retired and he was replaced by, a socialist. Yeah. It's unreal, and this is what's happened everywhere. So we don't get to make a lot of those decisions anymore in Democratic districts because all the candidates are bad.
It's just changed so much over the years. I remember I was at a pro-life event with Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and they showed this video of Bob Casey's dad, who was a pro-life Democrat, and that really doesn't exist anymore.
That's right.
Like the pro-gun Democrat is becoming sort of an endangered species.
That's right. And they said they're almost all gone. When Frank Burns leaves the legislature, it's the last dodo bird. That's it. And like I said, I question whether we revoked his endorsement. I said he had a bad call, and we said we don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. If you vote the wrong way, we're going to tell your constituents about it. And we revoked his endorsement. And so our committee, put my committee hat on. Our committee will be looking for another candidate to defeat him in the election next year.
You're a physician, so what we need to do is we need to get some land out in like Pike County somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and we need to create the pro-gun Democrat version of Jurassic Park. we'll get the DNA from an old fossil. Right. And just go to our establishment and find pro-gun Democrats walking around, and they're gonna escape and be released into the wild. I want to talk a little bit about President Trump. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we were thrilled when he won the election back into office. What would you say about the job that he's done so far in terms of protecting the Second Amendment and even advancing the agenda to some degree? I know it's early, but what would you think so far?
Yeah, so far so good, I would say. He's already said, and the problem is getting the bill to his desk. He said he would sign H.R. 38, which is the National Concealed Carry Reciprocity, or the Constitutional Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act, I think is what it's called. And that's fantastic, and again, that's a standalone bill. We got that 60 vote hurdle in the Senate, right? But he said flat out he would do that. And then all the changes that we've seen at the ATF with that they've eliminated zero tolerance. So a lot of these things are coming out of the Trump administration. Through his appointments in the ATF, and they're rolling back, these kind of things. Like I said, I have an FFL. I was relieved when Trump got the others. I know zero tolerance was going away. I mean, if you make a wrong mark on your 4473, and then somebody can say, we're going to pull your license for making some sort of stupid clerical error, which is completely innocent, doesn't hurt anybody.
You get a phone book size stack of rules when you're talking about being a federal firearms
Yeah, there's a phone book stack of rules.
For people who don't know what we're talking about, for firearms dealers, they have a federal firearms license, and during the Biden administration, there was a zero tolerance policy. So if you made any kind of mistake, your license was getting revoked, and they're putting you out of business. Let's talk a little bit about national reciprocity, because we're talking about preemption at the state level. It is really tough. Obviously, it'd be ridiculous if you had to know different laws from county to county, township to township. But it is really difficult to know the laws going from state to state, and there are people who intend to do no wrong and end up getting jammed up and thrown into jail for crossing the wrong imaginary line. And so tell us a little bit about national reciprocity.
Well, the way the bill's written is kind of like your driver's license. So, you have a Pennsylvania license, your driver's license is good in all 50 states. So what this says, if you your concealed carry permit in Pennsylvania, we call them licenses to carry firearms. If your concealed carry permit is like your driver's license, if you go to another state, that state honors your concealed carry permit, and you can carry concealed in that state. And if you are from a state which is permitless carry or constitutional carry, then your driver's license serves as that function, right? So it honors that. So it's really good. It's a way to say, your rights, your Second Amendment rights, do not end at state lines. And when I drive, I don't think I would ever want to go there anymore. But if I ever went to New Jersey or New York, unfortunately, you have to drive through New York to get to some places. But I don't want my rights to end at the state line. So I think this is a good thing, right? And I can't think of a better way to advance our Second Amendment rights. Now, I would think that these states would throw a lawsuit up right away and try to challenge it. All of a sudden, they'll be constitutionalists and like the 10th Amendment again, right?
Exactly.
Fast. Oh, who would have thought? New York likes the 10th Amendment, states' rights. Well, okay, so that's going to happen. But I think that it's definitely the way to go is obviously constitutional carry in as far as state law is concerned. But as far as federal law is concerned, then I think there should be full faith and credit applied to, your concealed carry license or lack thereof if you're from constitutional carry state.
You were talking about your rights ending at the border. It goes even beyond that, because you have people who unintentionally have something in their vehicle,
right,
and end up being thrown in jail for really long periods of time.
Right.
These are accidental criminals. They
like a Hollow Point in New Jersey.
Like a Hollow Point in New Jersey outside of exemption for single, they call it hollow nose or dum-dum bullets is the way the law calls it. So it could be the head. Because bullet, anybody who's taken basic pistol knows the difference between a cartridge and a bullet, right?
That's right.
So there was a guy who was actually indicted on a keychain.
Really?
Because it was a hollow nose bullet under the law.
Wow.
And penalty, it's crime of the fourth degree, 18 months in state prison. You lose your gun rights throughout the United States for life. And if you got multiples, it's 18 months per hollow nose or dum-dum bullet. So, yeah, ridiculous.
Exactly. So, and you have to be careful of that now, even with state-by-state reciprocity.
That's what I was going to say. Right. Question, with national reciprocity, would that even have an impact on the hollow nose or dum-dum bullet prohibition?
Well, right. So you would still have to abide by the state laws. Yeah. So even now, like I have Pennsylvania, I have Florida non-resident, and I got my Maryland wear and carry. So when I go to Maryland, I have to, even though I'm licensed in Maryland, I have to follow the laws in Maryland of where I can carry. Right, that's not going to change. Right, although there's some aspects in that bill that would need to be fixed. So one of the problems with national concealed carry reciprocity, or what constitutional concealed carry reciprocity is, the carrying near schools, right? So you're exempt if
Gun-Free School Zones Act.
The Gun-Free School Zones Act. That's it. You're exempt if you have a concealed carry permit from your state,
in that state,
from your state.
Yeah.
So if you have reciprocity or you have national concealed carry, if your state permit, you'd be in violation of federal law by driving by a school. So that would exacerbate that problem. And it's one of the things I suggested to our federal team is that we should fix that in the bill is clarify that the Gun-Free Schools Act is, it's not just limited to you concealed carry permit from your state. It could be any state or national concealed carry.
Dumb law to begin with.
It's a dumb law to begin with. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It should be repealed. But I'm saying that this is a glaring thing that it could.
Oh, yeah.
Right. It could really be a problem, if people don't pay attention. It's a problem now. So if I didn't, my permit's honored in Georgia because Pennsylvania has reciprocity with Georgia, but I'd be in violation of the Gun-Free School Zones Act because I don't have a Georgia permit.
There are a couple of different hyper technicalities. Even 926A, when we're talking about transportation, starting at point A where it's lawful to own and possess your firearms, you're going to point B where it's lawful to possess your firearms. You can travel through these strict states so long as you store your firearms in a very specific manner. Now, there have been debates over the years as to when your travel is no longer continuous, right? Because you can't use a law like this to go to New Jersey. You could use it to pass through New Jersey and end up at a friendly state, let's say New Hampshire. But when is your travel no longer continuous? There was a guy who stopped in a hotel because his flight got rerouted from Allentown, Pennsylvania to Newark, New Jersey, and he missed the bus to take them on the shuttle, ended up in a hotel. They said his travel was no longer continuous. There was a guy who stopped on the side of the road because he was tired. They said his travel was no longer continuous. So then people start to ask, what about gassing up and using the restroom? I even heard, I don't think that there's a case opinion on this one because it didn't make it quite that far. It was resolved at some point. But a colleague told me about a guy who was changing a flat tire in Maryland years ago because he was passing through under 926A, under the safe passage, and got a flat tire, was changing that flat tire, and they arrested him saying his travel was no longer continuous, completely outside of his control. So you have questions as to when is your travel no longer continuous, because that's specifically defined in the law, and they tried to amend that going back a few years to include you can stop to gas up, use the restroom, and some people would say you should be allowed to stay at a hotel so you're not driving through that state if you're too tired or whatever the case may be. But just as you're talking about, you have these issues that pop up after the bill's already passed with this question surrounding them, because Congress doesn't specifically lay it out.
That's exactly right. And I understand New York is very strict too. I mean, even for police officers under LEOSA, the law enforcement, if you're a law enforcement officer, you can carry in all 50 states if you're certified to do so. They harass other law enforcement officers traveling through New York, right? Because their laws are so strict.
So if there are people who are watching this and they want to get involved in the fight to protect Second Amendment rights and advance Second Amendment rights, what could they do?
Well, the easiest thing is to visit GOA's website. It's real easy. It's gunowners.org, plural, gunowners.org, all one word. And then if you just go to the website, and there's two things you can do there. One is really simple, easy, and won't cost anybody any money, and that is sign up for our email list. Just fill out, make sure you put your full address in on it so that you can be localized to your district so you get all the emails. So you'll get state alerts from me if you live in Pennsylvania. Or if you're in another state, you'll get alerts from that state, and then also you'll get everything from the national office, what's going on in D.C., and it's been really active lately because of all the stuff going on with the HPA and the Short Act. So there's that. So join the email list, and then you also can join GOA. It's $25 for a year's membership, and I always tell people it's the best $25 you'll ever spend to protect your Second Amendment rights. But most importantly, we just want you to get involved, right? So get on the email list. And when you get an email from us, we're different from some other groups. So when you get an email from us, there's always something in there for you to take action. So you click on the button, you type in your information, where you live, it'll automatically load up your state elected officials or your federal elected officials, and you can fire off a letter to them. And that's how we change things. Remember, I mentioned mobilization and confrontation. So this is how we mobilize our members, and then we give our elected officials the thing they love the best, constituent mail. So gunowners.org.
You know, one thing I will say about being a member of GOA is you're not hit up for donations nearly as frequently as some of the other organizations. I'm a member of multiple organizations. Yes. It feels like as soon as you give them money, they're already asking for
something else.
The next donation.
Yeah, typically on the back end, when you fill out an alert, there'll be a page you're dropped onto if you want to make an extra few dollar donation like that. But we don't give you the hard sell for all kinds of stuff like some other organizations do. Everything we do is tied to action. The value of GOA is we mobilize our members. We're nothing without our members and supporters. We give all the credit to any legislative accomplishment to our members and supporters all the time because they're the best. They get out there, they do things, they show up to rallies, they send emails, they make phone calls when phone calls are necessary. It's all the credit is for them.
And even reaching out directly to these politicians when something's on the line, right?
That's
Telling
right.
them what they want done. I'd imagine that helps in certain situations when there's a decision that needs to be made and
Absolutely.
they hear from the constituents saying, here's what we want.
Well, it's Senator Everett Dirksen said it the best. When I feel the heat, I see the light.
Yeah, that's true.
So we're in the environmental control business, so we turn up the heat.
And we just went through a presidential election. What kind of involvement did Gun Owners of America have with that?
Well, quite a bit. So one of the things we did in Pennsylvania, GOA can really take credit for this because we worked very closely with Hunter Nation and Don Jr. and Ted Nugent. And we made some really nice videos. And those videos, very short videos, were co-branded between Hunter Nation and GOA to mobilize hunters and gun owners in swing states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, those states, and to mobilize them to get them out to vote. And it had we saw some of the numbers from that the other day. I can't remember the numbers off my top of that, but it was very impressive. And Hunter Nation did just a marvelous job of doing all the demographic research on who to target, who to reach. And those are the people we reached with those text message campaigns. And we also put them on social media. So we were able to mobilize people to defeat Kamala Harris.
That's great.
Yep.
And shout out Don Jr. and Eric, true
Don,
legit
right.
gun guys.
Yes. Yeah. So it was Don Jr. and Ted Nugent. Yeah. And they did the videos. We did 2 rounds of them. And yeah, Don's videos were great. Yeah. Both of them are gun guys. Absolutely true. Yeah.
Shout out Ted Nugent too.
Yeah, Ted Nugent.
Him out of there.
Yep.
I've never had the pleasure of meeting Ted Nugent, but shout out to you, Ted Nugent.
Yeah. So that was a real, PAGOA. I worked on that. My wife Suk was really active in presidential campaign. She worked for the Trump campaign in the past, and she volunteers for GOA. She does a lot of stuff for the women's outreach in Pennsylvania for GOA.
I want to say that's how I met Suk.
Yeah.
Almost 10 years ago was Trump campaign for the 2016 election.
Yep. That's it.
Well, we're going to have her on the Garbage Gang next time. That would be a lot of fun. We'll get her in the studio. Any parting words for our other members of the Garbage Gang, Dr. Val?
Well, I just keep fighting. While things can look good on the federal level, they can turn at any time. We have a midterm coming up next year, but that doesn't necessarily translate to the states, right? So we've had a lot of wins in the federal government, a lot of rollbacks with the ATF. Things look pretty good at the federal level, but that doesn't necessarily play out in the states. Pay attention to what's going on in Pennsylvania. If you don't live in Pennsylvania, pay attention to what's going on in your state because things aren't necessarily the same. Well, most of the fight with the Second Amendment of gun rights is fought out in the states, not in the federal government. It's very difficult to accomplish anything in Congress. But at state legislatures, things go through much more quickly, much more readily. So you got to stay vigilant, and especially at the state level.
I hate to say it, but I always feel like Pennsylvania is one election away,
Yes.
one bad election away from turning into New Jersey
Absolutely,
as far
it
as
is. Yep.
anti-gun laws go.
Yep.
So it is important to stay on top of it. And it gets increasingly more difficult when you just had this major presidential election to keep people involved. I
That's
feel
right.
like everybody's like, just leave me alone for a little while. I don't want to.
We call it the Trump slump.
The Trump slump.
Yep.
And it's a good thing to call it. So Don't fall into the Trump
Don't
slump,
fall into the
right?
Trump slump. Pay attention, especially what's going on in your state.
Dr. Val, I'm looking forward to many, many more episodes with the Garbage Gang. Thanks so much for being here today.
You're welcome. I'm a repeat offender on your show.
You're a repeat offender. You're a founding member of the Garbage
yes.
Gang. You're in the cartoon introduction.
I know. It's great. Thank you so much for that. It was wonderful.
We miss you, Ellie. Daddy loves you. Thanks for tuning into the Mike G and the Garbage Gang podcast. If you want to be a proud member of the Garbage Gang, we need you to like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out one of the recommended videos, and comment. Tell us what you think. We love having you as a member of the Garbage Gang. We'll see you next time.